Before we start, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who thinks they do not believe in anything they cannot explain. Because by the end of this story, I promise you, that is going to be a much harder thing to say. Drop a comment when you finish and tell me what you would have done differently. Now turn the lights down, put your headphones on, and let us begin. Every town has a house that the local kids dare each other to walk past instead of run past. In the small town of Millhaven, that house belonged to the Ashcroft family, and this is the story of what happened to them, pieced together from police reports, journal entries, and interviews given by the one person who survived to talk about it. I'm not going to tell you this is definitely true. I'm going to tell you the case file is real, the family is real, and you can decide for yourself what that means. Part 1. The family. The Ashcrofts moved into the house on Calder Lane in the autumn of 1987. There were 4 of them. Harold Ashcroft, a quiet man who worked as an insurance appraiser. His wife, Marion, a former schoolteacher who had stopped teaching 2 years earlier for reasons neighbors never quite got a straight answer about. And their 2 children, a boy named Peter who was 11, and a girl named Louise who was 14. The house itself had a history before they ever set foot in it. It had been built in 1922 by a timber merchant who died in it under circumstances the county records list only as accidental. 3 families had owned it since then. None of them stayed longer than 4 years. The Ashcrofts got the house for almost nothing, which in hindsight should have told them something, but people rarely listen to a price tag when they are desperate for a fresh start, and the Ashcrofts, by every account, were desperate for exactly that. Neighbors who remember them describe a family that seemed, at first, completely ordinary. Harold waved from his car every morning on his way to work. Marion brought a casserole to the block's welcome committee within the first week. The children rode bikes up and down Calder Lane like every other kid in Millhaven that year. The first sign that something was different came almost exactly 1 month after they moved in, according to a neighbor named Ruth Callahan, who was interviewed by local police years later and whose statement is part of the official case file. Ruth said that in late October of that year, she was walking her dog past the Ashcroft house around 10 at night when she noticed every light in the house was on, every single window glowing, which was strange enough on its own, since the family usually went to bed early. But what she remembers most clearly, what she repeated word for word in 3 separate interviews over the following decade, was that she could see all 4 family members standing perfectly still in different windows of the house, each one facing outward, each one simply staring into the dark street, not moving, not speaking, for as long as she watched, which she estimated was close to 5 minutes. She said she almost called out to them, but something about the stillness stopped her. She went home instead, and she did not sleep that night. The next morning she saw Harold Ashcroft mowing his lawn and waving at her exactly like nothing had happened. Ruth never mentioned it to him. She told police later that she wished, more than almost anything else in her life, that she had. Part 2. The journal. What we know about the months that followed comes largely from a journal kept by Marion Ashcroft, which was recovered from the house after everything that happened, and which was eventually entered into evidence, though large portions of it were never released to the public. What has been released paints a picture of a woman who began that autumn hopeful and ended it somewhere else entirely. An early entry, dated in September, describes the house warmly. Marion writes about the light coming through the kitchen window in the mornings, about Peter's laugh echoing through the empty upstairs hallway before they had finished unpacking, about finally feeling like the family had landed somewhere solid after years of financial trouble in their previous town. By November, the tone of the journal changes. One entry reads, and I am reading this close to word for word from what has been made public. Peter says there is a man in his closet who only comes when I turn off the light. I check myself. There is nothing there. But he described the man's coat in a level of detail an 11-year-old should not have been able to invent. And when I asked him where he had seen a coat like that before, he said he had never seen it anywhere except in the closet. Another entry, 2 weeks later, is shorter. Louise will not sleep in her room anymore. She sleeps on the floor of our room, and when I ask her why, she says the ceiling breathes. By December, Marion's handwriting in the journal begins to change, becoming tighter, more cramped, sometimes crossing out entire lines so thoroughly that investigators could not recover what had originally been written beneath them. The final entry that has been made public from that winter simply reads, "Harold does not believe me anymore, and I am starting to understand why he would rather not." Part 3. The appraiser. Harold Ashcroft's job, as I mentioned, was as an insurance appraiser, and this detail matters more than it might seem to at first. Part of his work involved investigating property damage claims, which meant he had, over the years, walked through dozens of houses that had burned, flooded, or otherwise been destroyed. He had seen, in his own words in a recorded interview from 1988, quote, "more ruined homes than most people see in 3 lifetimes," end quote. He said in that same interview that nothing in his professional experience prepared him for what started happening in his own house that winter. He described coming home from work in early December to find every clock in the house stopped at the exact same time, 3:17, despite the clocks running on different batteries in different rooms. He described this without any dramatic flourish, in the same flat, procedural tone he probably used to describe fire damage to insurance clients, which somehow made it more unsettling to hear. He described the temperature in Peter's bedroom dropping without explanation, the furnace running normally, every other room in the house sitting at a comfortable temperature, and Peter's room alone sitting at a cold that Harold said, quote, "felt less like winter and more like standing inside a refrigerator that had been left open for a long time," end quote. He described, and this is the part of his interview that is hardest to listen to, coming home on the night of December 9th to find all 4 family photographs that hung in the front hallway turned to face the wall. He asked Marion if she had done it. She said no. He asked the children. They said no. He turned the photographs back around, and the following morning, they were facing the wall again. He said that was the night he stopped sleeping through the night, and the night he started keeping a hammer under his side of the bed, though he admitted in the interview that he did not know what he thought a hammer was going to do. Part 4. Please. The most detailed first-hand account we have of what happened to the Ashcroft family comes from Louise Ashcroft herself, who was the only member of the family to survive what happened at the house, and who gave a single lengthy interview to investigators nearly a decade later, once she was an adult and finally willing to speak about it. Portions of that interview are part of the public case file, and this is where the story becomes difficult to hear, so if you need to pause here and come back, I understand completely. Louise said that by January, her brother Peter had stopped speaking almost entirely, communicating mostly through single words and long silences, and that the few times he did speak at length, he spoke about the man in his closet as though the man were a person he had known his entire life. She said Peter once described the man's face to her in complete, calm detail, and that the calmness was what frightened her the most, more than any of the details themselves, because an 11-year-old describing something horrifying with no fear in his voice at all is not something you forget. She said their mother, Marion, began sleeping during the day and staying awake through the night, sitting at the kitchen table with all the lights on, watching the hallway. When Louise asked her what she was watching for, Marion told her, quote, "I am making sure it stays where it is supposed to stay," end quote, and would not explain further. Louise described the final week of January as the point when things stopped being something the family could quietly manage and started becoming something none of them could control. She said the temperature dropped throughout the entire house, not just Peter's room. She said the stopped clocks began, on occasion, running backward for a few seconds before stopping again. She said she began hearing, late at night, the sound of someone walking slowly up and down the front hallway, footsteps that matched no one in the house. Footsteps that continued even after her father got up, turned on every light, and stood in the hallway himself to prove there was nothing there. She said the footsteps did not stop. They simply walked around him. Part 5. The night of February 3rd. According to the official police report, on the night of February 3rd, a call came into the Millhaven Police Department from a neighbor reporting a disturbance at the Ashcroft house. When officers arrived, they found the front door standing open in the cold, every light in the house on, and no sign of forced entry. They found Harold Ashcroft in the upstairs hallway. The report describes his condition in clinical terms that I am not going to repeat in detail here, only to say that the county coroner's official cause of death was listed, after months of review, as undetermined. They found Marion Ashcroft in the kitchen, seated at the table exactly where Louise said she had taken to sitting each night, The journal open in front of her, the final entry cut off mid-sentence. They did not find Peter Ashcroft. Not that night, not in the days that followed, not in the extensive search of the house and surrounding property that continued for weeks afterward. Peter Ashcroft was never found. His case remains, to this day, formally classified as a missing person, though it has been more than 3 decades. They found Louise Ashcroft alive, sitting on the front porch in the cold without a coat, having apparently walked out of the house herself at some point during the night. She was 14 years old. When officers asked her what had happened, her only answer, repeated several times according to the responding officer's report, was, quote, "It finally got tired of waiting," end quote. She would not, or could not, elaborate further that night. Part 6. What Louise said, 10 years later. In her later interview as an adult, Louise finally attempted to explain what she meant by that sentence, though she made it clear this was her own understanding of events, formed over years of trying to make sense of something that resisted being made sense of. She said that in the final days before February 3rd, she came to believe that whatever was in the house had been there long before her family arrived, patient in a way that felt almost deliberate, as though it had learned that people eventually leave on their own if you simply wait long enough, and that every family before hers had left before it finished whatever it was doing. She said she believed her family was the first one it decided not to let leave. She said the last thing she remembered clearly from that night was her mother telling her, calmly, to go outside and not come back in no matter what she heard, and that she obeyed, and that she has spent every year since wondering whether that obedience was the reason she survived, or simply the reason she was the one left behind to carry all of it. She said she has never gone back to Colder Lane. She said she does not need to because some nights she still hears those footsteps in her own hallway, in houses that have nothing to do with the one in Millhaven, and she has stopped being able to convince herself that it is only ever in her head. Part 7. The house today. The house on Colder Lane still stands, though it has changed hands several more times since 1988, and every family who has lived there since has left within a handful of years, according to county records, none of them offering a public explanation for why. The house is currently unoccupied. Local teenagers still dare each other to walk past it at night, the same as they likely did before the Ashcrofts ever arrived, and probably the same as they will long after this video is uploaded. I want to be honest with you about something before we end. I cannot prove to you that what happened to the Ashcroft family was anything other than an unbearable tragedy that happened to unravel in a house with an unfortunate reputation for vulnerable people whose fear fed on itself in the dark of a long winter until it became something none of them could survive. That is one explanation, and it may be the correct one. But I also cannot explain the stopped clocks, all running on different batteries, all stopping at the exact same minute. I cannot explain the photographs. I cannot explain a coroner's report that ends in a single word, undetermined, after months of review by people who do not use that word lightly. And I cannot explain what happened to an 11-year-old boy who walked into a house on an ordinary autumn afternoon and simply never walked back out of it, in a case that after 3 decades remains, on paper, still open. If this story does not convince you that some houses remember things they should not, and that some things inside those houses are more patient than we are, then I do not think any story will. But I would ask you this. The next time you walk past a quiet house late at night, and every light inside happens to be on, and you think for just a moment that you see someone standing perfectly still in the window, watching you the way Ruth Callahan once watched the Ashcrofts, I would not stop and stare too long. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to the whole thing. Like this video if it kept you up, share it with someone who claims they do not scare easily, and subscribe so you never miss the next case file. Drop a comment and tell me whether you believe this one or not. I read every single one of them. I will see you in the next video. Until then, sleep well if you can, and maybe check your hallway on the way to bed.